Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Heiman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Hi, I'm Liz Heiman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. I'm here with crew member Mike Simmons because everyone else is on vacation because it's July. And Mike and I are talking about our favorite topic, which is sales process. At least it's our favorite topic to discuss and debate about. Right now, we're going to talk about the stages. And we're going to talk about defining those stages. And we're going to talk about really different ways to go about it and why it matters. And this may seem like a big topic to spend 20 minutes on, but really it's not, because there's so many things that we can talk about. We can talk about how we each address this, which we do it very differently. And we can talk about the mistakes that we see and what happens, when we do things one way or another way. I think, so welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Liz.
I think, let's start with the stages. Where do they start and where do they end? Before we talk about what they are, we can start talking about stages from marketing, from your very first engagement on the marketing side, all the way through close, and then back around again, right? Yep. So where do we want to start this discussion, Mike? I'm leaving it in your hands. Where do we want to start the sales process discussion? Do we want to start once it gets into the salesperson's hands, or way out at the beginning?
Yeah, I think let's just start it at the conversion point where an opportunity is recognized as a real opportunity. This is the Sales SOS podcast, so we're not going to talk about marketing, and we're not going to talk about all that other stuff. And we'll take advantage of us being here alone and everybody else being on vacation. Let's start with the opportunity being created, and let's finish with the opportunity confirming that we did what we said we were going to do. So that's going to be a little bit after the close. I mean, we've already gone through the implementation, but we confirm what we said we were going to do, and then we start a new opportunity if it's a renewal at that point in time. Good with that?
I'm good with that. Okay. And so that first stage, when the deal is being created, is actually a very sticky subject. So it sounds really simple. So if we want to call that stage prospecting, and Mike's going to call it something else, so we're going to give him a second to talk about his way of doing it. But if we're talking about this part where it gets transferred, or the salesperson creates a deal, or a deal is created, it can be created in a couple of ways, right? In that very first stage, either the salesperson can find that deal or that opportunity within an existing client. That salesperson can have an idea about who they want to sell something to, or it can come in through marketing as a marketing qualified lead that has converted to a sales qualified lead, an MQL and an SQL. So those are places where a deal can get started. And I'm going to talk about the sticky part in a minute, but why don't we, so if that's where we're starting, Mike, how do you name your stages? And why do you name them that way?
So I'm very particular in the stages. And if we were talking about this maybe 5 years ago, I would have said super particular, like you have to name it this way. Now I'm less interested in the specific names. I'm more interested in the job to be done of the stage. Call it whatever you want. And the reason why I went that route is I was working with a client who had just implemented another sales process inside their organization, a sales system that was implemented inside the organization, and it wasn't working. It wasn't serving the purpose, but they were not going to go back in and rename all of the stages to align with the Catalyst sale process. The catalyst sale process, it's validated. That's the first stage. All of the stages are past tense. You go through the gate. We've already gone through the gate. So it's something has happened in the past, and that's how you improve probability of sale. But the first stage for me is validated. And in validated, all we're doing here is validating that we see a scenario where we could potentially work with each other. So a couple of things have to happen. I have to have met you. I've had to have looked you in the eyes, had a conversation with you, and got a little bit of information out of the discussion. What do you care about? What are you doing? Why are we talking? What are you struggling with? Not like super, super, super detailed, just early stage, kind of like we just met up at the bar kind of thing. Validated. I want to validate that there's the potential for an opportunity for us to work with each other. And at that stage or that point, it gets put into CRM, HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever. And probability of sale is 5%, sometimes 10, but 5% is typically what I like to go with at that point.
Okay. Keep going, because we have a different language. So why don't you keep going through yours?
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So, and I'll move pretty quickly then. So validated first, let's validate that we see the yes, no answer, the binary question, binary statement, depending on how you want to look at it. They have to answer to say, yes, I've made it through the validated stages. I see a scenario where we would potentially work with each other. Okay. The next stage for me is qualified. Qualified means I understand the problem from the perspective of the customer. From a qualification framework perspective, I use this thing that looks like a hexagon. It's what problem, who has it, who's impacted by it, who cares about it, why does the problem persist, why is it important to solve, when do they need to solve it by, how are they solving today, how might they solve it in the future, and what's our 30, 60, 90. This is a stage where we will spend a lot of time. We'll spend a lot of time in this stage before we move and can call ourselves qualified. But at a minimum, what I need to understand is the problem from the perspective of the customer, their language, not my language of the problem, their language of the problem. The next piece is fit. So what I'm doing is I'm confirming fit on my side, and qualified would be 25%. Confirming fit on my side is based on my understanding of the problem, we can solve that problem with our solution as it sits. Okay. So that's fit on my side. 40%. Next stage is client confirmed fit. Based on my understanding of the problem and what we've communicated about the solution, the client has confirmed that we are the right fit for them. We're agreed, we're aligned. And the cool thing about this fit stage is there's going to be a lot of back and forth. This is the area where that stage is going to kind of loop back and forth. And this is where things start to look a little bit like chutes and ladders with these stages. So I can, there are some organizations where people will accelerate really quick and then all of a sudden they have to go backward because they learn something new. So validated, qualified, fit, client confirmed fit, all past tense. Then we get into proposal approved. So we've delivered a proposal to the customer, has all of the information, has all the points, what problem we're solving, why it's important, business impact, how we're going to solve it, what the costs are, all the resources, people, time, whatever. Proposal approved. Then we move into closed won, because there's a gap between proposal approved and closed won. Sometimes you get to proposal approved and everything is working really well, but then you run into a challenge with legal. And one of the first 7-figure deals that I thought we were going to close as a team, we lost because of 14 words in a piece of language with a bank. And that was like one of those things where like, come on, nobody's ever going to look at this thing. But the point of the stages is I move through validated, that's 5%, qualified, 25%, fit is 40%, client confirmed fit, 60%, proposal approved, 90%, closed won, 100%. And the last one for me is confirmed, just typically 30 to 60 days after the relationship has kicked off, going back to the client saying, did we do what we said we were going to do? If yes, then let's talk about referrals and other groups where we could work with. If no, let's fix it now. Let's not fix it 90 days before the renewal in that kind of environment. But it's all past tense, all single questions to move through each of those gates. And the job to be done of each stage is to help us get more comfortable with forecasting probability of sale. This is not about client decision making. It's not about any of that kind of stuff. It's about probability of sale for me. How well can we forecast in the business? Helpful?
Yeah. So the couple things. Mike's stages are all past tense, but notice there was a definition for each stage. Sure. And there was this is what has to happen in order to move to the next stage. I call that a gate. And we'll talk a little bit more about gates or rules in the next segment. But so there's when we think about this, there's a stage. It's got a name. It's got a definition, and there's a rule to move it to the next stage. This is very, very important. I also want you to notice that, and we're going to talk more about this, Mike did not have meeting or demo. There was no activity that was listed as a stage, right? And we're going to talk about why that creates chaos later. So I approach this really differently, and I'm going to tell you, I'm very old-fashioned. Right? So I use the Miller-Heiman way of doing this. But what I will tell you is what I have seen is so much chaos in CRMs because the sales process and the naming is so convoluted. It creates so many problems that I have gone back to this kind of old-fashioned way of doing it. And or reconfirmed this old-fashioned way of doing it. And rather than doing things past tense, my way of doing it is either present tense or present progressive, which is ing. And the idea is, and sometimes I have to do that with a team, the ing, because they need to understand that we're actually in the process of doing something now, right? So Mike's process starts with, he names it as completed. Mine is, we are in the process of doing this. Whichever one of those better fits your culture, I'm okay with. 100%. But what's really important is just because it was completed doesn't mean you aren't going to go backwards. Sometimes you think you're really far along the way because you've got one person who's walked you through, and then somebody else comes in and you're like, oh, there's all these other people. We're not even qualified yet. Move it back. We thought we were solving. So my stages are prospect, qualify, and then I either use cultivate or solve. Close or closing, and then closed won or closed lost. Sometimes I add another stage in there if someone needs it, but these are really simple. The idea is simplicity here. Everybody understands what it means to prospect. We're going to talk about this prospecting one or verified one in a minute, or validated. So that first stage is I'm going out and looking for business, and I'm putting it in here. I haven't had confirmation. I haven't had a confirmed conversation, but I know there's something real there. Like, I had a conversation, and Joe at this company told me they're going to build this, and they're going to need to buy from us, or from somebody. So I'm going to put that in. Maybe it's, hey, they just built a road, and they're going to need something done. Now that road is complete, I'm going to put that in as an opportunity because I think we could get that one. So prospecting is this process of going out and finding new opportunities, filling the top of the funnel. This is filling the top of the funnel. Some of it could happen on the marketing side. A lot of it happens in the sales side in a lot of businesses. So that's the first step. Qualify or qualifying is the second step. This is the process where we have that first conversation or first couple conversations, maybe with one person or a couple different people, and we really understand, do you have a need? Is there, and these are the basic old-fashioned ones, right? I think we call them BAMF, right? Is there a need? Can we fill that need appropriately? Is there a fit? Is there some sort of a timeline during which they think this might possibly happen? Or is this like pie in the sky, maybe in 3 years? Is there some sort of budget that could be available to do this? Sometimes there's just no budget and it's not ever going to get done. Sometimes there's a set budget. Sometimes there's this wiggle room where we can find budget. And you might have other things that you qualify with. Do they use a certain technology? Is it within a certain timeline of something else? Can I get to the key buyers that are going to make a difference? There's all kinds of things that are about fit when we're qualifying. And then for me, the next stage, I often call cultivating. because cultivating is that time when we're building relationships, we're answering questions, we're solving, we're dealing with objections, we're figuring out the best solution, we're writing a proposal, we're revising a proposal, we're going back and forth in a relationship, coming up with the point where they can say, yes, this is what we want, and that's a price that's acceptable. And that is when we start close, right? When we get the verbal agreement, we never, ever, ever say, yeah, they said they want it, therefore it's closed, right? That is the point where we begin closing. I need a signature, I need a check, I need sign off by legal, I need a purchase order, whatever it is I need in order for this to be official, not just verbal. And that's how I think about stages. And it's a really different approach than Mike has in the language, in the execution a little bit, but really, when you get down to it, we're really going through the same process. We've just called it something different. So whether you do it past tense or present tense, or ing, progressive, be consistent.
Yeah.
You don't get to switch between past tense and present tense and ing, because that's a place of other chaos.
Yeah, and the alignment comes from that same school of thinking. Like, Liz's dad, it was very important to the early stage of my sales career as we were going through, and this is the foundational part of what the Catalyst sale process is. There's some iteration that's been made because there are some problems that I needed to solve for in certain organizations that I was working with, and I also like to simplify stuff. As much as it might look complicated when you look at the stuff on the whiteboard, it starts to feel really math and science. You can organize and get into the specific process and say, hey, what's the specific job to be done of this stage? Or what's the job to be done of this activity? Or what's the job to be done of whatever, or this data point that we put in the CRM? And the thing that I would challenge people on, I know one of the things we said we're going to get into the mistakes, Liz hit on a couple of them. Lack of clarity around definition. So if you ask everybody in your team how they define solutioning or qualifying, and they're using the same word, but all of their definitions are different, you have a problem. And it's kind of like the scene in Princess Bride where the dude's walking around saying inconceivable. And they say, you keep using that word. I don't think you know what it means. Words do have meaning. And this is one of those where organizations will make mistakes over and over and over again. Another mistake that will end up happening is you use a different sales process for forecasting in other functional areas of your business. I am not a fan of that. I like to have the same process in every functional area, but I can change a variable like probability of sale. If it's an existing customer and I'm looking at add-on business inside that organization, my probabilities are probably a little bit higher than a new customer acquisition. Or on a renewal deal, if I keep them separate, probabilities are higher, but they still go through those same stages. You're going to qualify, you're going to solution, you're going to close, you're going to, in some cases, unfortunately, close lost. But make sure that you have definitions, and then have those definitions serve purposes across different functional areas. Then when you come together as a team, you're actually talking about the same thing. Change the probability variable. Don't make this any more complicated than it needs to be. You can simplify.
So I think that this whole thing about percentages is a really important discussion, because I think it can completely undermine all of the work you've done around agreeing on language. So there's this automatic thing that happens in the CRM where it says this, if it's in this stage, the probability is going to be this. And we do that because we need high level data. We need to be able to say, on average, if it's in this stage, there's a 25% chance of closing, or a 50% chance of closing, or 90% chance of closing. So when you gather all of the data together from all of the sales reps, it's typically pretty accurate. And if it's not, then you will begin to say that those numbers aren't accurate. We need to do something different. The problem comes when individual salespeople feel tied to that number. Well, this is in solving or cultivating or whatever stage we want to call it. But I only think, I don't know, there's not a 50% chance. There's maybe a 20% chance this is closing. I'm going to leave it up in prospect. Well, that's not where it is in the buying process, but it's the percentage that the salesperson thinks is accurate. And they're afraid to be, measured on something that might not be accurate. This is where you get into the sandbagging idea, right? Where salespeople are moving things around and making stuff up to protect themselves. So what we want to make sure is that if the salespeople can see that number, that they sometimes I don't let them see it. I'm like, just hide that number. Just don't make it visible to the salespeople. We have a second one that the salesperson is able to manipulate, where they can, this is their number, and they can say, this isn't qualified, but I feel really, really good about it. I want to move it up to 50%. Or this one is ready to close. It's in solving. There's no way we're getting it, but we're bidding it because I want the opportunity to bid next time. Or, whatever. We're not a good fit for this, but we have to bid it anyway. Whatever the answer is. It gives them that ability to not put it in the wrong stage because they're afraid of probability. So either remove the probability discussion from them or give them the opportunity to manipulate their probability without manipulating the accounting probability side of it, the finance side of it.
This is a leadership issue. Like, if your reps are afraid of anything as it relates to the kind of work that you're doing, what kind of work are you doing? Like, it's
but they are afraid. I mean,
no,
right.
I know you see it over again. And what ends up happening is this is the challenge that you have when you have high performing individual contributors get moved into sales leadership roles without understanding functionally how a sales process works. And then they struggle with communicating that up and around throughout the organization. So then they start manipulating they manipulate the forecast, and they get into things. The one that drives me nuts is when people start reporting on things like, this is my best, this is my worst, and this is my commit. Like, are you freaking kidding me? Let's let the system serve the purpose that it's intended. Don't have a crap close one date because it's right at the end of the quarter, and you want to keep everybody off your back, and then have it leak into the next quarter, because that doesn't help anybody inside the organization with forecasting. And don't just push everything way, way out because you don't have a date and you just artificially decided to put one in there. At least align it with something functionally inside the business, like a fiscal year or a budget cycle or an MBO, like something. Like, it drives me nuts. And Liz knows this. And typically on these things, whenever we start talking about some of the leadership stuff, it just drives me nuts that crap leadership creates this situation where we reinforce or enable poor behavior. And it's primarily because we haven't been really clear around what's the job to be done of the thing. So the job to be done of the process. So that's another mistake that we make with sales process, is if we think the sales process is fundamentally going to change the way that people engage with their customer, I think we're making a mistake. Let's give them a approach that they use to engage with their customer. If we think our sales process is fundamentally going to change how buyers buy, we're making a mistake. Yes. We're asking the process to serve the wrong purpose. I'm walking around with this golf club. If I tried to drive a golf ball with this golf club, I would be in a lot of trouble. I'm holding onto a putter.
But I can hit it almost as far with my putter as I can with my driver, and I've proven that.
Some days that's the case with me too. It's such a frustrating game. And all of these games that we play get really frustrating when we try to apply the wrong tool or the wrong process to the wrong situation.
Right.
As you can tell, I got fired
up. So those are a couple of mistakes. Remember that those percentages really are an aggregate number. And the idea is that we typically get around 50% of the ones that are in this stage. That's what that number means. It does not mean there's a 50% chance that this particular lead will close. And if you drive your salespeople to think that, you're going to create bad behavior, which is putting things in the wrong stage, lying about the close date, all these things. So we want the mistake around the sales process is putting the wrong kind of pressure around the wrong kinds of things. So another mistake I want to talk about, which is my favorite one, not my favorite one, but the one I see most often, is when we start naming things with an activity. So, and I think this comes out of SaaS, and SaaS being in many cases a single buyer. So what Mike and I are talking about now really is a complex business to business sale. So you may not need a buying process that's very complex if it's one person and you talk to them once or twice and close a deal. That is not what we're talking about. You don't need all of this if you have a system, a process like that. And I think in SaaS, many times, what's happening is the seller is talking to one person who's buying for an organization, and they're hoping that it won't be a complex decision, that one person will do it. So they'll have a meeting, they'll do a demo, they'll write a proposal, and they'll hope to close it. And so they name them stages, they name the stages like that. And this has bled over into other industries and created absolute and utter chaos. And what I mean by that is if the stage is demo, and I completed the demo, so I move it to the next stage, that assumes I only had to do one demo. But if I'm in a complex business to business sale, I might have to do 3 or 4 demos with different people at different stages along the way. So, but if I did a demo, I have to move it to the next stage because the demo is completed. Once the demo is completed, if I wrote a proposal, then the next stage is closed. And so I send the proposal, I move it into closing. Right? Now, that means every single person I sent a proposal to is in the bottom of the funnel. Well, people might ask for a proposal at any point along their buying process. And one of the most glaring examples of doing this wrong is a company that sold pharmaceutical product. It's a long story, but they were helping companies who were creating pharmaceuticals, and people would come to them very early stage and say, can you give me a budget? Can you write a proposal so I can take this to my funders? Guess where that was in the funnel? They wrote a proposal, so it's at the bottom of the funnel. So when you have activities, it's really hard to go backwards and say, well, I wrote the proposal, but this really isn't qualified yet because we don't have qualify as a stage. We have demo and meeting and proposal as a stage. Those are activities that happen within stages. Demo might happen across several stages. Proposal, the first proposal might be to somebody who has absolutely no authority whatsoever. It's going to take it back to the team for a discussion before you even really know what's supposed to be in the proposal. So it's really important that we not confuse activity, or we end up with activity and stages, or we end up with this funnel that has this huge bulb on the bottom and everybody's wondering why it doesn't close. My dad used to call it a constipated funnel.
Yeah.
All this stuff is in there and nothing's coming out because it's not real.
I had that conversation with the CFO yesterday about some stuff that we're running into. And it's the same, it's not the same, some of the same kind of things. And that in this instance, proposal sent is we're going to send a lot of proposals that are out there. And what we're trying to figure out is, do we incorporate another stage? And it might end up being that proposal approved rather than proposal sent, because the proposal sent is an activity. But the point the reason I bring it up is these things will happen inside organizations based on the workflow that happens inside the organization and the preconceived notions that people have around how work happens, like how business happens. The other thing that will influence, that will drive you absolutely nuts when you're working through and building this, is somebody will read a book. And they'll read the book that says that demo is a stage and discovery is a stage and whatever the heck else it is that they have as a stage. But they're writing a book based on a model that they were introduced to while they were a member of that organization, not a model that they built. they might not even have been reporting on how those models worked, or they might have been selling for Zoom in March of 2020, where I don't care what you called your stages, your probability of sale was probably pretty high and everything was moving through really quickly. And you could have called them and had them serve any purpose. And you would have thought you were a genius because you create opportunities and you close opportunities. So be careful, buyer beware, be careful what you're paying attention to.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between proposal sent and proposal approved.
Yes. Huge
because you could have 9 iterations of a proposal, depending upon the complexity of your company.
Yeah.
So, and where does RFP fit into this? So let's stop this conversation.
Okay.
And let's talk about let's talk about activities, and let's talk about tools and all of the different things you need along the different stages in our next little segment. How's that sound?
I want to thank all of our friends for not showing up today.
Bryn, Daryl, John, Renee, Chris, thanks for not being here. We're having so much fun without you. Okay, so join us in our next podcast if you want to talk about what happens in each of the stages. And that's a wrap of this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope today's episode has equipped you to navigate the sales seas with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn. Until next time, keep sailing towards those sales goals. I'm Liz Heiman, your captain here at the Sales SOS podcast, saying smooth sailing and successful selling.